Hello, and welcome back to Cursed Lullabies. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered like cursed lullabies, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. Last week I went stargazing for the first time in my life. I'd never been one of those people who cared about space. I wasn't the type to name constellations or get emotional over photos from telescopes. The sky was just the sky. Something that was there when you remembered to look up, and gone the moment you went back inside. But one of my friends had been trying to get me into it for months. He kept saying it could change your perspective on life. I told him he was being dramatic. He didn't argue. He just showed me pictures he'd taken on his phone. Real photos, not something he'd pulled from the internet. The sky in those shots looked unreal. The stars were thick and sharp, like someone had sprinkled salt across black glass. After that, I finally gave in. I figured it could be fun. Worst case, we'd take a drive, camp for a night, come back with a couple blurry photos and a story about how cold it was. Best case, I'd get a few nice pictures and understand why he was so obsessed with it. Because he'd done it before, he already had most of the gear. A decent camera, a tripod, extra batteries, those little red lights people use so they can still see without ruining their night vision. I brought what I could so I didn't feel like dead weight, food, extra water, a couple of emergency things, and a few missing items he said we'd need. Before we left, he told me he knew a spot he'd always wanted to visit. He said other stargazers liked it too, because the view was unlike anything else. He didn't say exactly where it was, just that it would be worth it. The way he said it made it sound like a promise. On the drive there, I asked him what started all this. I'd known him most of my life. In school, he was the guy who stared out the window when the class got boring, but not in a thoughtful way, more in a get-me-out-of-here way. The idea of him choosing to sit under a freezing sky for hours felt like a personality glitch. He smiled like he'd been waiting for me to ask. It's a special hobby, he said. It means nothing to most people, and everything to a few. Then, after a pause, he corrected himself without correcting himself. Not a few. The right people. There was something about the way he said that phrase, like it wasn't just a figure of speech, like he meant it literally. It made me laugh a little, but I also felt weirdly uncomfortable, like he'd quoted someone else instead of speaking normally. The drive took at least an hour, maybe closer to 2. I wasn't tracking the time. He never actually told me where we were going, and I didn't press him. He'd always been the outdoorsy one between us. I trusted him. That trust started to crack when we arrived. The place looked abandoned. Not remote, not quiet. Abandoned. No other cars, no distant lights, no signs of people. And what bothered me more than that was the lack of normal life. No insects buzzing around our headlights, no bird calls, no rustle of something small in the brush. Even the air felt still, like the area had been emptied out. I said something about it, trying to make it sound casual, even though it wasn't. This place is dead, I told him. Are you sure this is it? He didn't even look concerned. He just adjusted the straps on his bag like we'd pulled up to a normal trailhead. You mustn't be afraid to ascend, he said. Very few can do it. I waited for him to laugh, to make it clear he was joking. He didn't. I don't know what he meant, and honestly, I'm not sure he meant it for me. It sounded like something rehearsed, like a line you repeat until it feels true. We unloaded the equipment from the car and started up the mountain. To be fair, the hike itself wasn't bad. It wasn't a steep climb where you're gasping for air after 5 minutes. It was a long, gradual incline that felt almost too smooth, like the mountain had been shaped to guide you upward rather than resist you. There were moments where it honestly felt like we were being led. That thought should have made me feel calm. Instead, it made me feel watched. The silence didn't help. The only sound was the wind, and even that was strange. Usually when you climb, the wind gets stronger and sharper. Up here, it did the opposite. The higher we went, the calmer it became, until it was barely a breeze at all. The air felt thick and quiet, like the mountain was holding everything down. At some point, I realized I didn't know how long we'd been walking. I couldn't tell you whether it had been 1 hour or 3. My sense of time felt smudged, like my brain had decided the details weren't important. My friend didn't talk much. I tried once or twice to start a conversation, but he kept drifting farther ahead. Not sprinting, not trying to ditch me, but steadily creating distance like he needed space. It made it hard to talk, and after a while, I stopped trying. When the sun started going down, he finally stopped and said we'd camp there for the night, about halfway up. We set up the tent and got our gear organized. The sky turned a dull gray blue, then purple, then the first real darkness. We ate dinner, and for a little while it felt like normal again. We joked. We talked about stupid stuff. For a moment, it was just 2 friends camping, the way it should have been. That normal feeling gave me enough courage to ask something I'd been sitting on all day. "What got you into climbing?" I asked him. He took a second before answering, like he was deciding what version of the truth to give me. "An old friend from uni," he said. "We joined this society. That's where I got into all of it. Stargazing, too. How come you never mentioned him?" I asked. He shrugged. We drifted apart after uni. The way he said it didn't sound like drifting apart. It sounded like waiting, like he expected to see that person again, and soon. "So are you meeting him?" I asked. "Like, is he coming out here?" He ignored the question completely, like he hadn't even heard it. He stared into the dark for a while, then got busy with the gear again. For the next few hours, I studied the map and helped plan the route up to the peak. I kept telling myself I was just overthinking things. New place, weird silence, late night, mountain air. My brain looking for patterns. That's all. While I was looking at the map, I saw him reach into his bag and pull out a flask. He tipped it up and took a long drink. The liquid inside was dark red. In the firelight, it looked almost black, but when it caught the glow just right, it looked like wine. I watched him for a second, long enough to notice how carefully he drank it, like it wasn't just a casual sip. "What are you drinking?" I asked. He took another slow drink before answering, which annoyed me a little, like he wanted to make me wait. "It's something good for your head while climbing," he said. "What does that even mean?" He shrugged again. "Just trust me." "Can I try some?" I asked, trying to make it sound like a joke. His whole posture tightened. Not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. "You wouldn't like it," he said quickly. That defensive edge made my stomach sink. If it was just some herbal thing, why act like that? Why not just say no and laugh? A little while later, he went to sleep. He fell asleep fast, too, like someone flipping a switch. 1 second, he was adjusting his sleeping bag. The next, his breathing had that steady rhythm of a person already deep under. I didn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop. It kept circling the same questions, like a tongue worrying at a sore tooth. Where are we really? Why is it so quiet? What's special about this mountain? Why is he acting like this is more than a hobby? I tried to brush it off. It was my first time stargazing. I was in a new environment. Maybe I was just nervous and letting the mood get to me. Maybe everything would make sense in the morning. I looked at my friend. He was still asleep. His bag was beside him, and the flask was sticking out of an outer pocket like it had been left there on purpose. I told myself it was just a quick sip, something to help me relax, something to help me sleep. A little wouldn't hurt. So I leaned over and took the flask. I poured some of the red liquid into my cup. The smell hit me first, and it was unlike anything I've ever smelled. Not alcohol exactly, not perfume, not medicine. It smelled like every herb and spice on earth had been crushed together, but somehow it didn't clash. It wasn't chaotic. It was perfectly blended, like all those scents were meant to be one thing. I took a small sip, then another. The taste was wrong in the best possible way. Smooth doesn't even cover it. It tasted like pure comfort, like sweetness that didn't get heavy or sickening. Sweeter than any chocolate, but not sticky. It felt like it melted on my tongue and left warmth behind, spreading through my chest and limbs. My shoulders dropped, my jaw unclenched. My thoughts slowed down, not into sleep, but into a dreamy calm, where everything felt soft and safe. I didn't fall asleep after that. I lay there with my eyes open, thinking about angels. I don't even know why. I'm not religious. I don't spend time imagining heavenly things. But after that drink, the idea of angels felt natural, like I'd remembered something I'd always known. I pictured one with painful clarity, not a cartoon version, not a stained glass version, something huge and impossible and beautiful. The thought of seeing one in person made me feel giddy, like a kid imagining the best day of their life. I stayed awake the whole night with that image in my head, and the idea didn't fade. It felt like it was being fed, like the drink had opened a door and something on the other side had noticed me. In the morning, we continued climbing. I could see the peak now. There was a wide, flat area at the top that looked perfect for setting up camp. A clear, open space where the sky would feel close. I tried talking to my friend as we hiked. I asked him something, I honestly don't remember what. He didn't respond. I thought maybe he hadn't heard me, so I repeated myself. Still nothing. He walked steadily, eyes forward, lips moving slightly like he was talking under his breath. I couldn't make out words. I told myself he was tired or focused or just in his own head. But it didn't sound like normal muttering. It sounded like someone reciting something quietly so they wouldn't forget it. We reached the top in the early evening. If I had to guess, around 6. The sun was still up, but it was already slanting low. We set up the tent again, got the camera and tripod ready, then sat around waiting for the sky to darken. At that point, my friend started acting more normal again. He talked. He laughed. Nothing heavy, just passing time. But I noticed something that made me uneasy. He kept wiping his mouth. He was drooling. Not a little bit of spit when you laugh too hard. It was constant, like his mouth couldn't keep up. He wiped it away casually, like it didn't bother him. I teased him about it, because that's what friends do when something looks weird. He didn't care. He just smiled and kept watching the sky. When it finally got dark enough, we started stargazing for real. And I have to admit, it was incredible. Pictures don't prepare you for it. Up that high with no city lights, the stars don't look scattered. They look crowded. The sky looks alive, like a deep ocean filled with bright creatures. I felt small in a way that wasn't depressing. It was strangely comforting, like all my problems had been shrunk down to their proper size. We were sitting there staring upward when something changed. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. A new shape against the stars. A movement that didn't match the slow drift of clouds. Then I realized it was coming closer. Something was descending from above, drifting down toward us as if the sky had opened and let it through. And I knew what it was, because my mind had been prepared for it all night. An angel. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. It didn't look like a person with wings the way people draw them. It was vast. Its wings spread wider than anything should be able to exist in our world. The surface of them shimmered with countless scales, each one catching starlight in a color I can't describe properly. It wasn't just bright. It was a color my brain didn't have a name for, like trying to explain a new taste to someone who's never eaten. Its eyes were huge and black, like smooth stones wet with moonlight. They reflected the world without giving anything back. And when it looked at us, it felt like being seen through. Like it wasn't looking at our faces, but at whatever was underneath. Then it spoke. The voice was so beautiful it hurt. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's the truth. It sounded like music and language at the same time. It didn't just reach my ears, it settled into my bones. Even now, in daylight, with normal sounds around me, I can still hear it if I think about it for too long. My friend stood up slowly, like he'd been waiting for permission. And then, from the angel's chest, something extended. A thin, long appendage, like a pale cord, reaching down with calm certainty. It wrapped around my friend's body and lifted him off the ground as easily as if he weighed nothing. He started to scream. But it wasn't a scream of fear. It was joy. Pure joy. The kind of sound someone makes when they believe they're being chosen for something wonderful. I remember thinking, of course he's screaming like that. Who wouldn't? As he rose, the angel opened something for him. A path. A cavern. Not in the mountain the way a normal cave would be. It was more like a hole in reality. A wound cut into the air. The darkness inside it wasn't just the absence of light. It was a darkness that ate light. My eyes tried to look into it and couldn't. It felt deep in a way that had nothing to do with distance. It felt deeper than the ocean, deeper than the Mariana Trench, deeper than anything humans are supposed to measure. My friend went into it without hesitation, as if he'd practiced that moment in his mind for years. And then he was gone. When it happened, I should have run. I should have screamed. I should have done something human. Instead, the angel released a thick red liquid from its mouth. It didn't fall straight down. It moved with purpose. It slid through the air at an angle, like it was being pulled by a magnet, and it struck the mountain in front of me, leaving a shining, dark stain that steamed faintly in the night. The smell hit me, and my mouth watered instantly. My hands moved before I even decided to move. I dumped out what I had, flask, plastic containers, anything that could hold liquid. I rushed forward and gathered it up like it was precious, like it was the only thing that mattered. I hadn't eaten since the first sip the night before anyway. Food felt pointless now. Heavy. Dull. This was better. This was what my body wanted. Then, just like that, the angel rose back into the sky and disappeared among the stars. But I knew it would come back. I knew it the way you know the sun will rise, the way you know you'll eventually need to breathe. It wasn't a hope. It was certainty. The next morning, I packed my things and left the mountain. I didn't feel sad about my friend being gone the way I should have. I know how that sounds. I know what people will think if they read this. But the truth is, I felt calm, satisfied, like the night had gone exactly the way it was supposed to go. It was a good trip. I appreciate my friend for taking me. Stargazing isn't something I would have ever done on my own, but it is something I will do again. I've already been trying to find someone else to take to that spot. It's special in ways that are hard to explain to someone who hasn't stood up there and seen what I saw. People think they want to see something holy. They think they want proof of something bigger than themselves. But most people don't. Not really. It takes the right person. I'm going to find someone who can handle it. Someone who won't run. Someone who will understand what it means to be chosen. One day I'll see my friend again. I know I will. And when I do, it won't be like meeting up for coffee or catching up on life. It'll be something better. Something permanent. Since that night, I can't stop thinking about the angel. I keep replaying the moment its voice filled the air and my whole body felt like it was being tuned to the right frequency. I want to see it again. I want to stand under it again and feel its gaze settle on me like a hand. Sometimes I lie in bed and think about that dark place it opened for my friend, that endless place that looked like it could swallow the world. Instead of scaring me, the thought makes me feel lightheaded and happy, like I'm remembering a joke that never stops being funny. It keeps me awake at night, quietly laughing to myself in the dark. Because all I can think is how lucky he was, and how lucky I'm going to be when it comes back for me. Story 2. They tell you 2 things when you arrive in Harrow Fen. First, don't travel after dark. Second, never say the name of whatever sleeps under the church. I ignored both. Not because I'm brave, I'm not, but because I've never been good at taking warnings at face value. Warnings always sound like a dare, wearing polite clothes. I came in on a wet Thursday with a cheap suitcase, a black coat, and grief that wouldn't sit still inside my ribs. I was still learning how to exist without my brother. 6 months isn't long, but it's long enough for people to stop bringing his name up around you, like they're afraid it will reopen something they don't know how to fix. I checked into the only hotel in town. It leaned slightly toward the road like it was tired. The lobby smelled of damp carpet and old tea. The woman at the desk looked up when I walked in, then looked right past me as if she was checking the window for something moving outside. My room key was waiting. So was the letter. It was tucked under my pillow, folded cleanly, placed with care, like someone had been in my room and wanted me to know it. For a second, I wondered if it was a welcome note or an invoice, something normal. Then I saw the handwriting. Elias. My brother's handwriting, neat but hurried, the way it got when he was trying to fit a lot of thoughts into a small space. Do not let it hear you remember me. I actually laughed, which sounds insane now. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind that comes out when your brain doesn't know what else to do. Elias had been dead for 6 months. Drowned, they said. They found him in the river with mud packed under his fingernails and reeds stuffed into his mouth. At his funeral, the priest rushed through everything, messed up the order of the prayers, even put Elias's wedding ring on the wrong finger. His widow screamed and sobbed in the front pew like the sound could pull him back. So seeing his handwriting wasn't comforting. It was wrong. It was impossible. But the letter didn't make me afraid right away. Grief does strange things to your fear. It burns through your instincts. It makes you curious about things you should avoid because you start thinking it can't get worse than what you already know. I took the letter downstairs and held it up to the woman at the front desk. Who put this in my room? No one, she said. That's not possible. She didn't look surprised. She slid a different key toward me without meeting my eyes. Room 9. The latch is weak. Put a chair under the knob. I didn't take the key. You know what this is. Her face tightened like she was bracing for a sound she didn't want to hear. The fluorescent light above the counter began to buzz. It wasn't a normal buzz either. It grew louder, harsh and uneven, like something trapped inside the fixture. Then she smiled. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile people give at funerals when they don't know what else to do with their mouths. Everyone in Harrow Fen knows what this is, she said, That's why we keep our voices down. After sunset, I felt a chill crawl up my arms. Because of the thing under the church, the buzzing got louder, like the light itself didn't want that sentence spoken. Her smile stayed, but it didn't reach her eyes. Don't make me hear that name. That was the moment I understood the difference between a place that's scared and a place that's trained. Fear in Harrowfen wasn't loud. It didn't look like panic. It looked like habit. It looked like people who had practiced obedience until it felt natural. That should have made me leave. It should have. Instead, it made me want to see what they were hiding. So I walked out into the drizzle and headed straight for the church. It sat in the center of town like a rotten tooth nobody could afford to pull. The stone was dark with moisture. The stained glass looked clouded, like it had been breathed on for years. The doors were chained shut, and the lock holding the chain looked new and expensive. Too new for a church that looked this old. The chain wasn't to keep vandals out. It was to keep something in. I was staring at it when a boy appeared beside me. I didn't hear him approach. He was maybe 10 years old, barefoot in wet grass, wearing clothes that were too thin for the weather. His skin was so pale, he looked like fog had decided to become a person. His eyes were very dark. They reminded me of deep water where you can't see the bottom. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "That depends on who you ask." He looked at the chain doors. "It likes new people. Likes the ones who still have things to lose." I crouched a little so I wasn't towering over him. "What's your name?" He frowned like I'd asked the question in the wrong language. I had one. That's not an answer. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "Names go first, then faces, then the parts that hurt." Before I could ask anything else, he backed away and ran behind the churchyard wall. I followed, because my common sense has always been weaker than my need to know. Behind the wall, half sunk into mud, was a row of flat stones. Not proper headstones, more like markers. Names had been scratched into them. Some were fresh enough that the grooves were sharp and clean. Others were old, softened by rain. And some names had been crossed out with deep, violent gouges, like someone had tried to claw the memory right off the stone. One marker made my chest tighten. Elias. Just his first name carved deep, the letters dark with trapped water. Under it, smaller writing had been added. He remembered too much. I wish I could tell you I broke down. That I cried. That I felt the kind of grief people expect in stories. I didn't. What I felt was colder. A kind of calm that came from realizing I'd been right to come. Elias hadn't just died. He'd been taken. And the letter wasn't a gift. It was bait. A hook. If Harrowfen was a machine, then the church was its housing. And whatever slept under it was the engine. Something was being fed here. Something was being kept alive by the town itself. And if it fed on memory, then memory wasn't just pain. Memory was currency. You could spend it, save it, trade it, use it as a weapon. That's how my mind works, for better or worse. I don't see evil and good first. I see function. A knife doesn't care what it cuts. I went back to the hotel and asked for a map. The woman handed one over without a word. Harrowfen was small, but the streets twisted in a way that made it feel larger than it should. The roads looped back on themselves like someone had folded a paper map too many times and creased the logic out of it. The map listed 6 landmarks: the hotel, the church, the mill, the river, the school, and then a 7th place that had been scratched out so hard the paper was almost torn. Through. I ran my thumb over the damaged spot. "Don't go there," the woman said quietly. What was it? Her jaw tightened. Where the first one learned to speak. The first what? She looked down at the counter like the wood might give her safer words. "Nothing you need." People always say that when they're afraid the truth will make them responsible. That night, I didn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, the hotel walls started to breathe. I don't mean I heard creaking. I mean the wallpaper itself seemed to swell and shrink in slow, wet pulses, like something large was shifting inside the plaster. I sat up in bed and stared at the pattern as it moved. The air felt thick, like the room had been sealed and left to sit. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, dragging steps. Bare feet against old carpet. And then a voice. My brother's voice. Don't open it. My stomach dropped so hard I felt sick. I stayed still, listening. Don't open it, the voice said again. Closer. Thinner. It will learn you. I got out of bed anyway. That's the awful thing about grief. It makes you think you deserve to be hurt. It makes you reach toward the thing that will ruin you, because some part of you wants to be ruined if it means you get one more second with what you lost. I put my hand on the doorknob. On the other side, my brother started crying. Elias never cried like that when he was alive. He was gentle, but there's a difference between kindness and never being tested. This wasn't sadness. It was fear stripped down to something childlike. The crying stopped abruptly. Then something scratched the wood from the hallway side. 3 slow strokes, like fingernails, like a child dragging nails down a door. I opened it. The hallway was empty. The exit sign at the far end flickered red. The air smelled damp, like rain had gotten into the building somehow. On the carpet outside my room was a single wet footprint. Small, child-sized. In the middle of that footprint sat a coin. I picked it up. It was warm, like it had been held in someone's hand just before it was dropped. One side showed a woman's face I didn't recognize. Around the edge on the other side, words were stamped in uneven letters. We pay for what we keep. I pocketed the coin and left the hotel before dawn. I went to the mill. Harrow Fen looked different in early light. Not safer, just more honest. You could see how old the buildings really were, how tired. Some towns are built on industry. Some are built on guilt. Harrow Fen had the bones of both. The mill sat beside the river, silent. Its wheel turned steadily, even though the water wasn't moving in a way that should have pushed it. It just turned, patient and steady, like it didn't need a reason. Inside, the air smelled like rust and stale grain. Dust hung in the light. The place was empty except for a table in the center of the floor. And on the table was a ledger. It looked like it had been there, waiting for me. I opened it and found pages filled with names, hundreds of them, written in ink, pencil, faint marks, and hard scratches that looked like someone had written with something sharp when they didn't have a pen. Next to each name were notes, not dates, not addresses, notes. Forgets his daughter's voice first. Dreams of drowning begin on night 4. Can still remember the color blue. Will trade a brother for 3 more days. I felt my pulse in my throat. Not panic exactly, something tighter. Something that made me want to close the book and also made me want to read every line until my eyes bled. Farther down the page, I saw a newer entry. My brother's name in clean handwriting. Elias Vane, partial retrieval unsuccessful. Subject now aware. Below that, written in a different hand, darker and sharper. Bring the younger brother. He is the colder one. My mouth went dry. I turned around. The boy from the churchyard stood in the doorway. He looked different now, more solid, more real, and he looked afraid, not of me, but for me. You should leave, he said. Why? My voice came out rough, because it knows you're the kind that can bargain. Everyone bargains, I said automatically. He shook his head. No, some people beg, some break. But you, he stopped speaking. Something behind him made the light change. A shadow gathered in the doorway, tall and narrow, with an outline that wouldn't settle. It had too many joints, too many bends. It was like a shape trying to remember what a body looked like. The boy's eyes widened. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness the way a stone disappears under water. I snapped the ledger shut. The shadow tilted its head, and I heard my brother's voice again. Not from the room, not from the hallway. From inside my skull, like a thought that didn't belong to me. You came. Fear doesn't happen in neat steps. It doesn't give you time to think. It folds time. It turns your body into an animal. It teaches you that your own memory can become a trap. I ran. I crossed the mill floor and shoved through a side door, stumbling into an alley that wasn't on the map. The buildings leaned close on both sides, turning the space into a narrow throat. Behind me, footsteps followed. Not running, not rushing, just coming. Patient, certain, like whatever it was didn't need to hurry because it already owned the ending. I burst out of the alley and reached the river, just as dawn started to bleed into the sky. The water was black and smooth. It didn't look like it wanted to reflect anything. On the bank stood Elias, or what was left of him. His coat hung on him, wet and heavy, as if he'd climbed out of the river seconds ago and never dried. His face was wrong in a way I can't fully describe, like something had peeled parts of him away layer by layer. Memory first, then identity, then whatever keeps a person moving forward through life. He looked at me with exhaustion so deep it made my throat ache. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "You sent the letter." He nodded slowly. "It needed you here. Why?" I forced the word out. He gave me a small, empty smile. "Because it can't eat what refuses to matter." That sentence hit me harder than any threat. The thing was still coming. I could feel it in the air, the way pressure builds before a storm breaks. Elias stepped closer to the river's edge. "There are rules," he said. "It lives on remembrance. The more you fear it, the more it stays. The more you love, the stronger it gets. The town feeds it by remembering what it takes. Every name, every grief, every stubborn effort to hold on. And if you stop remembering," I asked. Elias let out a thin, tired laugh. "Then you become hard to find." And I understood. Not because I'm brave. Because I was already half ruined. Grief had already stripped me down. Over the years, even before Elias died, I'd been cutting away the softer parts of myself. Friendships that asked too much. Hopes that made me vulnerable. Loyalties that could be. Used as leverage. I thought I was protecting myself. Maybe I was. Maybe I was just becoming empty. The creature under the church wanted memory the way fire wants oxygen. It had mistaken me for a feast. It had never met someone so cheap to consume. I turned to face it. By then it had stepped out of the deeper shadow, and I could see what the town had been hiding behind prayers and padlocks. It wasn't a demon with horns. It wasn't a ghost with chains. It was a person-shaped hunger. Its face never stayed the same for long. A mouth tried to become an eye. A cheek slid into something like a nose. Features collided and rearranged as if it couldn't decide what kind of person it wanted to pretend to be. It kept trying to settle into something familiar, something that would make my mind accept it. But it failed. Still, one expression held long enough for me to understand it. Recognition. It knew me now. I smiled back, and even I didn't like the way it felt. "Elias was never the one you wanted," I said. The thing hesitated, and that half second was all I needed. I pulled the coin from my pocket and threw it into the river. The water didn't splash. It screamed. The surface split, with a sound like stained glass shattering inside a huge, empty church. The air seemed to tighten. Somewhere behind us, the church bell began to ring on its own, fast and frantic, like a machine panicking. The creature flinched. Its shape flickered, unstable. Elias shouted something, but I didn't catch the words. The bell kept ringing like it was warning the whole town, like it was trying to wake up anything that could still be saved. I walked into the river. The cold grabbed me like iron. The current tugged at my coat. Beneath the surface, I saw pale shapes, drowned things reaching upward with hooked fingers. Hands brushed my legs and slid away. They tried to hold me and couldn't. I kept walking until the water rose to my chest, then my throat, then my mouth. And then I did something the town had never considered. I remembered it back. Not just Elias, not just my grief. I remembered everything. Every face I'd seen, every doorway, every twisted street that didn't make sense, every name in the ledger, every note about what people forgot first, what people traded, what people begged for. I remembered the boy who'd lost his name, the woman at the desk who smiled like a funeral, the stones behind the church with the gouged-out names, the scratched-out place on the map, the place where the first one learned to speak. And I threw all of it into the river in my mind like dumping a bag of meat to distract a starving dog. I gave it away on purpose. I felt something tear inside my head. Not pain exactly, but release. Like dropping a heavy object you didn't realize you'd been carrying. The water convulsed. On the bank, the creature shrieked. Not wounded, not dying, overexposed. Like something dragged into sunlight that shouldn't be seen clearly. Its shape cracked apart in pieces, not flesh, but stolen outlines. Memory is a net. Pull enough threads, and the thing trapped inside doesn't hold its form. I don't know how long I was under. Time stopped being a straight line. When I finally dragged myself up onto the far bank, I was shaking so hard my teeth hurt. My clothes clung to me like a second skin. The town was quiet, not peaceful, not safe. It was the heavy silence after a gunshot, when everyone is deciding whether they can pretend they didn't hear it. Harrow Fen still stood. The church still loomed. The hotel still leaned toward the road. But the air felt, shifted, like a door had closed somewhere deep underground. I walked back into the hotel, dripping on the floorboards. The woman at the desk looked up and smiled, politely. Not the funeral smile. A normal one. "Can I help you?" she asked. She didn't recognize me. That was the first sign. I set the letter on the counter. She picked it up and looked at it like it was just damp paper. Where my brother's handwriting had been, there was only a smeared stain, and beneath it a sentence I knew I hadn't written. "Now, they will forget you too." I stared at those words and waited for fear to take me. It didn't. What I felt was relief, clean and cold. Fear is a chain, and something had snapped. If no one remembers you, they can't call you by name. They can't use your grief to anchor you. They can't mourn you into being real again. You become, in the simplest sense, hard to catch. I left Harrow Fen before sunset. Nobody stopped me. Nobody watched me go. At the edge of town, I looked back. The church bell swung gently in the wind. Silent. No hand on it. I knew the town would fill the gap I'd torn. By morning, someone else would arrive. Someone softer. Someone with a warmer heart. Someone with a brother or a lover or a child they couldn't imagine letting go of. They would come believing horror is rare. They would learn what I learned. The world doesn't punish cruelty. It rewards whatever lasts long enough to outlive the witnesses. I'm writing this now from a rented room in a city 200 miles away, using a name that isn't mine. Yesterday, I reached into my coat pocket and found another letter. No stamp, no return address, just 4 words, written with the same neat, hurried hand. "We still remember you." I smiled when I read it, because now I understand what Harrowfen really is. It was never just a town. It was a mouth, and I was the only thing it ever failed to swallow. Story 3. I think I still have time to write this. Things have gone quiet for the moment. I shoved my desk chair under the doorknob and wedged it against the door as hard as I could. There's tapping at the window beside me, light and patient, like someone drumming a fingernail on glass. I'm on the second floor of my house. There weren't even trees outside this window when I moved in. I need to get out. And I need this to get out too, because I keep thinking about someone else finding that same website, feeling that same excitement, convincing themselves it's harmless. I need you to understand that the biggest mistake I made wasn't the seeds. It was what I did after they started growing. You have to go back a few months. I just moved into a new rental house. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it had a big fenced backyard. The yard was the kind of yard that almost felt unfair to have if you couldn't share it with an animal. When I first walked the property line, I kept imagining a dog sprinting in circles with the kind of joy humans rarely get to feel. The lease didn't allow pets. The landlord was an older man who spoke like every word cost him money. When I asked him about it, he didn't even pretend to consider it. "No pets," he said. "Not even a small dog?" I tried. He shook his head once. "I've been burned before. I should have left it there. Most landlords don't budge." But the yard was sitting right outside the kitchen, like an invitation. I didn't want to give up immediately. "What if I kept up the garden?" I asked. "Would that change anything?" He didn't even look at me. "About the dog? No. What about rent?" I pushed, because I knew he cared about that. That got his attention. He looked out at the yard the way someone looks at a problem they've already decided you'll fail at. "Spring and summer only," he said. "That's when the yard needs work. If it starts looking like hell, the discount goes away." "Yes, sir," I said, because I didn't want him to reconsider. "Tools are in the basement," he added. That should have been the end of the story. Cheaper rent, yard work, no dog. Something normal. But I still wanted something living in the house with me. Something I could take care of. Something that would make the place feel less empty. That's how I ended up getting obsessed with bonsai. I'm not sure why I latched onto it so hard. Maybe it was the idea of control. You take something wild, and you guide it. You keep it small, shape it, give it a form. It's like gardening with a long memory. I dove into it completely. Videos, forums, books. I bought the expensive little pruners and the wire and the soil mix that people online argued about like it was religion. I learned about exposing roots and wiring trunks and making tiny branches look like they'd survived decades of weather. The problem was the same problem everyone warns you about: time. Most of bonsai is waiting, especially in the first couple years. You do small work, and then you wait. You water, and then you wait. You stare at it and convince yourself you can see progress, and then, weeks later, you realize you were just staring at a stick. Years pass before it looks like anything special. Decades if you want something that actually makes people stop and stare. I wanted the satisfaction of growing a tree from seed, but I didn't have the patience. One night I was lying in bed scrolling through bonsai posts, and I decided I'd just buy seeds anyway. I told myself I'd start now, and even if it took years, at least I'd begun. But I didn't want basic seeds from some random marketplace listing. I wanted something real, something from a specialty vendor. I went deep into search results, clicking past the polished sponsored sites and the same recycled articles. Somewhere around page 9, I found a website that looked like it hadn't been updated in a decade. I can't remember the exact name now. It had something like accelerated seed stock in it, and it claimed the seeds could produce mature-looking bonsai in months. That should have been my sign to close the tab. But the site felt weirdly convincing in a specific way, like it wasn't trying too hard. White background, grainy photos, blue links, no sleek branding, no modern checkout process. It felt like a hidden thing you weren't supposed to find. I clicked a picture that looked like a Chinese elm, though the site didn't list Latin names I recognized. Most of the plant names were vague. The descriptions were confident without explaining anything. I'm embarrassed by how much I paid. The reviews were all 5 stars, and the comments sounded enthusiastic, like people had stumbled on a secret cheat code. One detail stuck with me because it was so strange: returns only accepted in original soil and original shipping container. I remember laughing at that. Like, what, am I going to return a plant with the same dirt it came with? I ordered a packet of 3 seeds at a discounted rate. I never got a confirmation email. The next morning, I tried to find the listing again, and it was gone. That was when I panicked and convinced myself I'd been scammed. I canceled my debit card, checked my account every hour, and told myself at least it was a lesson. 2 weeks later, a small box was sitting on my doorstep. It was heavier than it looked. There was no clear postmark on the outer cardboard box. It was just there, like it hadn't traveled through any normal system. Inside was a smaller wooden box sealed with a brass clasp. The inside was lined with a gray-blue metal that looked like it belonged in a lab, not in a seed package. On top was an instruction card. Germination stock. 3. Use dehydrated soil puck enclosed. Keep contained indoors. Do not overwater. Keep in a well-ventilated location. Do not allow root access beyond pot. At the time, I thought it was just weird marketing. A special product with dramatic warnings. I've seen people write ridiculous care instructions for plants just to make them seem rare. The seeds themselves were bigger than I expected. Smooth, dark, almost like small polished stones. When I held them in my palm, they felt warm. I should have stopped right there. I didn't. I planted one in a small pot with the included soil puck and set it in the corner of my den near an air vent on the floor. I figured the vent would keep the air moving and help keep mold away. For a week, nothing happened. I started telling myself again that it was a scam. A fancy box and some rocks. Then one morning I woke up and there was a green stalk, straight and fresh, pushing up like it had been there for days, and I just hadn't noticed. I felt ridiculous relief. It worked. One of them, at least. From there, it grew fast. Not just healthy fast, wrong fast. In a couple weeks, it had a tiny trunk. It wasn't a baby seedling anymore. It had structure. It had branching that looked ready to be wired and trained. Every day, I'd come into the den, and it would look subtly different, as if it had been growing while I watched, and only stopped when I turned away. I was thrilled. I took photos. I posted them. People commented that I had to be lying about the timeline. Others said I probably bought it from a nursery and pretended it was mine. Someone suggested I'd misidentified the species. Those comments didn't bother me. They made me proud. If strangers thought it was too mature to be real, that meant it looked impressive. I wanted to leave a glowing review for the seller, but I couldn't find the website anywhere. It was like it had never existed. When it was finally time to prune and shape it, I treated it like a ceremony. I sat with it, turned it slowly, studied the branches. I planned where to cut. I wanted it to look old, balanced, intentional. The first cut went through cleanly. Dark sap oozed out of the wound almost immediately. Not the light, sticky resin I expected. This was thicker, darker, and it had a smell that made my tongue react. A sharp metallic taste flooded my mouth, the way it does when you bite your cheek and taste blood. Except I hadn't hurt myself. I swallowed, and it didn't go away. I told myself it was just a strong smelling sap. Some plants have weird chemistry. It doesn't mean anything. I opened the pruners around a second branch. Before I could close them, something snapped across the back of my hand. Not from me bumping it, not from the branch falling. It moved fast, like a whip. It cut me like a paper cut, a thin sting that turned into a hot line. I jerked my hand back and stared at it, dumbfounded. The branch had returned to stillness, leaves trembling slightly. I stood there frozen, trying to force logic into it. Maybe I shifted the pot and the branch swung. Maybe there was a draft. The AC could have kicked on. But the vent was behind the pot, not in front of it. I finished pruning carefully, keeping my hands farther away. The sap sealed over the cuts quickly, thick and glossy. By morning, the tree had pushed new buds out where I'd pruned, like it was excited, like my trimming had fed it somehow. A few weeks later, it had grown enough that I decided it deserved a better pot. A real bonsai pot. Repotting would also let me expose more of the roots, which I'd learned was part of the art, showing age, struggle, character. I imagined pale roots curling over stone like the fingers of a tiny ancient thing. I wanted that look badly. When I tried to lift the pot, I almost dropped it. It was heavier than it should have been, like the soil had turned to wet cement. I had to use both hands and my legs, straining, and even then it felt like it was stuck to the table. I tugged harder and felt resistance, like it was anchored. I looked down and saw thick, pale roots forcing their way through the drainage holes. They weren't thin hair like roots. They were thicker, almost ropey, and a sickly white color that reminded me of mushrooms. My eyes followed them. They went straight toward the air vent, not just toward it, into it. The roots had grown between the metal grates and down into the ductwork like they belonged there. My first instinct was to protect the tree. Bonsai roots are delicate, and everything online tells you not to damage them. I stood there negotiating with myself, trying to find a way to free it without hurting it. I gently tugged. It didn't move. I knelt closer and saw it wasn't just one root. It was a network. A web of pale strands sliding into the dark. I could have left it, pretended I didn't see. But I couldn't. This was my HVAC system. This was the house. I couldn't have roots growing inside my vents. So I cut them. The second the blade went through, the roots recoiled. They didn't just fall limp like cut plant matter. They pulled back in a quick, tense motion, like a muscle spasm. The severed ends shuddered. The detached portion dropped into the ductwork and disappeared. That metal taste filled my mouth again. I repotted the tree anyway, trying to pretend it hadn't mattered. I used the premium soil mix. I positioned the roots over a stone the way I'd seen in photos. When I finished, it looked perfect. The roots were bright pale against the dark soil. The trunk had a graceful curve. It looked expensive. It looked ancient. It looked like something you'd see in a gallery and assume had been worked on for generations. For a day or two, everything seemed fine. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. A cut root had already found the drainage hole in the new pot. It was creeping out, reaching downward, reaching toward the vent again. I moved the pot away from the vent. The next morning, multiple roots had curved down the sides of the pot like pale worms, all angling in the same direction. I trimmed them again, firmer this time, telling myself I had to train it, keep it contained. The instructions had said not to allow root access beyond the pot, and I'd taken that as a practical warning, like it would make future repotting difficult. After I trimmed them, the tree dropped leaves overnight. It looked sick, thin, and limp. I felt guilty, like I'd punished it for trying to survive. I told myself maybe it needed more airflow. Maybe it was seeking moisture or nutrients. Maybe it was just a strange species. From there, little things started happening, small enough that I didn't react properly. The den began to smell like soil. At first, I thought it was because I'd exposed the roots and the fresh mix had an earthy scent. Then I started finding dust around the air vents in the house. Fine, gray dust like something had been ground up and blown out. I vacuumed more often. Last month, my water bill spiked. I blamed the house. I blamed a leak. I blamed the tapping I'd been hearing inside the walls. My landlord refused to check it out, and I didn't have the money to hire someone myself. The tapping came and went, always light, always rhythmic, like someone flicking a pipe with a fingernail. A couple days ago, I threw a small housewarming party. It was the first time most of my friends had seen the place. I cleaned more than I needed to, like I could scrub away the weirdness. Before people arrived, I rotated the bonsai on the side table so the light hit it perfectly. It looked incredible. The trunk had thickened into an elegant curve, the exposed roots wrapped over the stone like pale fingers gripping it. The leaves were glossy and dense. It didn't look like something I'd grown. It looked like something I'd inherited, like an heirloom. People noticed immediately. Emily leaned over it, drink in hand. "Wait," she said. "Is this the same tree from your pictures?" "Yeah," I said, proud. She frowned. "No, it isn't." "It is," I insisted. "You planted this, 3 months ago?" Something like that. She stared at me like I was lying, but the expression shifted into something closer to concern. "That's not normal." From the kitchen, someone said the den smelled like a greenhouse. Someone else said it smelled like pennies. I pretended I didn't hear that part. I hadn't smelled anything strange in weeks. I thought maybe I'd just gotten used to it. Mark was there, too. Mark wasn't a bad guy, but he turns into the type of drunk who thinks everything is a joke that deserves one more push. Toward the end of the night, he crouched in front of the bonsai with a beer in his hand and stared at it like he was studying a painting. "This is fake," he said. I ignored him. "It looks fake," he said louder. "That means it's doing well," I said, trying to brush him off. He scoffed. "You bought a tiny plastic tree and invented a whole personality around it." He reached out and flicked one of the leaves. Not hard, just enough to make it wobble. I stepped toward him before I even realized I was moving. "Don't." The room went quiet for a beat, like people could hear something in my voice that didn't match the situation. Mark held up both hands. Sorry. Didn't know you and Bonnie were serious." A couple people laughed. I forced a laugh, too, because I needed the moment to pass. Then Mark tipped his beer toward the pot and grinned. Banzai. The room laughed again as a little beer sloshed over the rim and soaked into the soil. "Mark." I snapped automatically. He looked at the pot, then at me. "Relax. It's a tree. I hate admitting this, but I felt real anger, not normal irritation. Protective anger, like he'd hurt something living that trusted me. I grabbed paper towels and dabbed at the wet soil while everyone drifted away to other conversations. Someone changed the music. The house relaxed again. The rest of the night felt normal. People moved between the kitchen, the den, and the backyard. The weather was nice enough that we kept the back door open for a while. I had a cooler outside near the steps because the fridge was packed. At some point, I remember Mark announcing he was going out to grab another drink. He looked at the bonsai and said, "Want one, babe? Be right back." He went through the kitchen and out the back door, and he didn't come back. At first, nobody noticed. It was late, people were distracted, conversations were loud, but by midnight the group had thinned, and Emily looked around, frowning. "Where's Mark?" "He probably left," I said, even though I didn't believe it. "His car is still here," she said. And it was. Parked under the oak near the curb, exactly where it had been all night. His jacket was still hanging over one of my dining chairs. His keys were still in the little key bowl I'd put out for guests. His phone was on the kitchen island, buzzing every few minutes with messages from the group chat we were all in. That was the moment the mood changed. People sobered up fast. We searched the yard with phone flashlights. We checked the fence line, the corners, the side gate. We checked stupid places, too. Behind the shed, under the deck steps, places no adult could hide. But you look anyway because you don't want the other possibilities. Someone suggested maybe he got picked up. Someone else said maybe he wandered off drunk. Eventually, someone called the police. They came, asked questions, looked around, took notes. I told them the truth. He went outside for a beer and never came back. So they focused outward, as if the danger was in the woods beyond the yard. By the time the last of my friends left, it was almost 5 in the morning. I stood alone in the kitchen after the last car pulled away, listening to my house settle into silence. The bonsai sat in the den where I'd left it. The soil looked darker than before, almost black, like it had absorbed the beer completely. I let it be and went to bed because I didn't know what else to do. This morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw something green in the sink. At first, I thought it was a piece of spinach or some herb someone had dropped. Then I realized it was growing out of the drain. 3 little shoots, thin, pale stems with tiny green leaves at the ends. They leaned toward the window above the sink like they were searching for light. I grabbed a fork and touched one. It bent away from the metal, not just flexing like a plant. It moved like it didn't like the contact. I jumped back so hard, I dropped the fork into the basin. That's when the instruction card flashed in my head so clearly it felt like I could see it on the counter. Do not allow root access beyond pot. I'd thought it meant the roots would get tangled and make repotting hard. That's what I'd assumed. That's what I'd wanted it to mean. I grabbed drain cleaner from under the sink and poured until the chemical smell burned my nose. The little shoots disappeared under the liquid. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, every pipe in the house seemed to react at once. A violent metallic banging erupted behind the wall under the sink. It traveled under the floor like something moving through tunnels. The counter trembled. The drain hissed. I heard the sound shift away from the kitchen, toward the den. Something under my feet made a low scraping noise, like heavy furniture dragging across hardwood. From the den came a dry, massive rustle of leaves. Not a gentle plant sound. 1,000 tiny movements layered together, like the tree was shivering with anger. Then, as suddenly as it started, the house went quiet again. I stood there holding the empty bottle, breathing hard, trying to convince myself I'd fixed it. I poured boiling water down the drain, too, thinking maybe heat would finish the job, wash out whatever was in there. Then I went into the den. The bonsai had outgrown its wire. The training wire I'd wrapped carefully around the trunk wasn't just tight, it was embedded into the bark. The trunk had thickened around it in minutes. The bark bulged at every turn, like the tree had swallowed the wire and was growing around it the way flesh grows around a foreign object. The leaves looked wet, glossy, too full. New roots spilled over the rim of the pot and touched the floor. One had reached the air vent again. Another stretched toward the kitchen like it could sense where the drain was. I stood in the doorway and tasted metal. I hadn't poisoned it. I'd fed it. That's when the truth finally landed. Simple and heavy. I needed to kill it. I went to the basement for tools. I'd only been down there a few times, mostly for the breaker box, and I never really looked at the stuff piled in the far corner. The smell down there was stronger than upstairs, rich and wet like soil that's been kept warm. I swept my flashlight around. At first I didn't see roots. That gave me a second of hope. I found the tool pile, a weed whacker, garden shears, a shovel, and a machete. I grabbed the machete because I couldn't think of anything else that would matter if I needed to cut through something fast. As I stood, my light caught a thin strand hanging from a ceiling beam. It was a root. Then I looked closer and realized it wasn't alone. The ceiling beams were threaded with pale strands. They followed the pipes, they followed vents, they followed electrical lines like they were using the house's structure as a map. The entire house had become a trellis for this thing. In the far corner, I noticed two thicker roots hanging limply, darker at the ends. Something about them looked wrong compared to the others. When I took a step toward them, I realized they weren't roots. They were shoelaces. A shoe hung from the ceiling, tangled in vines. Another step forward, and my flashlight beam found a leg attached to the shoe. Mark. He was suspended in the air by roots. Some of the roots acted like ropes, holding him up. Others were growing into him shallowly, spreading under his skin like veins you could see through a thin layer of flesh. Thicker roots were woven through the wall of his chest, not wrapped around him. Through him, as if he was soil, his eyes were held open. Thin tendrils hooked into the corners of his eyelids like tiny fish hooks. Two thick roots disappeared into his mouth. Smaller ones threaded between his teeth and down his throat. I wanted him to be dead. I needed him to be dead. Then his eyes shifted toward me. His lips moved, but not by choice. The roots around his chest tightened, squeezing his lungs. Air forced out of him in bursts, one word at a time in a raspy, muffled sound. He's almost ready. I don't know who he meant. I don't know if he meant the tree or someone else or whatever this thing was becoming. I just know I felt my whole body turn cold from the inside out. I swung the machete, trying to cut him down, trying to sever whatever was holding him. The roots recoiled instantly and pulled him tighter to the ceiling, like a hand yanking a puppet out of reach. His body made a sound that wasn't a human sound, like something deep inside him was being squeezed. A thick limb swept across the floor and knocked me off my feet. Before I could scramble back, roots dropped from above and grabbed my arm, pulling me toward Mark. I hacked at them with the machete. Every cut root leaked sap that smelled like pennies and made my mouth taste like metal. Some of it splashed onto my face. It burned. The basement lights flickered. The HVAC system roared to life like the house itself was inhaling. I realized I couldn't fight it down there. I needed to get upstairs. I needed water on my face. I needed to get away from Mark and the roots and the way his eyes followed me like he was still in there somewhere. I ran. The roots chased me up the stairs and into the den. The tree was changing in front of me. The trunk twisted and thickened, swelling as if it was straining against its own skin. Branches writhed. The exposed roots spilled over the pot and shot across the floor in fast, searching lines. Offshoots slid into vents, along baseboards, up walls. Some spread over the doors and windows like they were sealing the house shut. The tree itself was still relatively small in height, which was the most horrifying part. It didn't need to be huge to own the space. Its exposed roots were no longer pale. They were beet red. I sprinted to the front door and twisted the knob. Nothing. The knob wouldn't turn. I looked down and saw thin red roots threading into the seam of the doorframe. They had grown into the cracks. Under the paint, I could see them flexing and relaxing like veins under skin. I yanked harder. The door shifted, maybe half an inch, just enough for the roots to tighten like a muscle and close the gap again. I ran to the back door. Same thing. I tried the kitchen window next. I managed to shove it open 2 inches before red roots shot out, grabbed the frame, and slammed it shut hard enough to crack the glass. Then the roots spread across the pane, weaving through the broken edges until there was no gap left. I stood there, shaking, waiting for something to grab me. Instead, I heard tapping. One tap inside the kitchen wall, one tap under the den floor, two or three taps above me in the ceiling, moving back and forth. They never happened at exactly the same time, like they were waiting for a response, like they were testing, communicating, mapping. It hit me then that I wasn't training a tree. I'd given something a container, then a larger container, then a whole house. I'd practiced beauty through restraint like bonsai people talk about. I'd failed at the only rule that mattered. I didn't keep it contained. It found a bigger pot, and I was inside it. The floor creaked somewhere below, and the wood under me gave a sharp pop like something had pushed up against it. In the den, the leaves started rustling again, loud and dry, like countless tiny hands rubbing together. Now I'm in my home office. The chair is jammed against the door. The tapping at the window has started again, slow and steady. When I lean close enough, I can see the faint outline of red growth at the edge of the glass, like something has reached the second floor and is feeling around. Small roots are slipping under the office door now, thin and searching, sweeping across the carpet like blind fingers exploring a new room. I don't know if I should try to slash my way through the window or go downstairs and try to destroy the part of it that's still in the pot. I don't know if destroying the trunk would kill what's in the walls or if it would only make it angrier. But I can't sit here and wait for it to find a way to pull the door open. If you're reading this, please listen to me. Do not order seeds from any website claiming to have accelerated stock. If a box shows up without a postmark, if it feels heavier than it should, if it comes in a sealed wooden container with lab-like lining and instructions that sound dramatic and specific, do not open it. Do not give it soil. Do not give it water. Do not give it a pot. Do not give it a home. Story 4. Schaffer was a small highway town in southeast Texas, close enough to Louisiana that people joked you could smell the other state when the wind shifted. It was quiet, proud, and the kind of place where strangers still waved at each other without thinking about it. There were a little over 9,000 residents, and the town was so minor it didn't always show up on maps unless you were looking at something local, something printed for. People who already knew where it was. The town had grown in the 1960s, when the post-war baby boom pushed families outward and new highways cut clean lines through the countryside. Schaefer was one of those places that lived off the road. Traffic brought money. Money brought shops. Shops brought jobs. People settled, married, had kids, and the cycle kept going. Then things started changing. By the late 80s and early 90s, the prosperity thinned out. Suburbs pulled people away. Shopping habits changed. Big box stores showed up in bigger towns. Work moved around, moved overseas, disappeared. The decline wasn't dramatic at first, just slow enough that older people would sigh and say things like, "used to be different," and then keep going anyway. Still, Schaffer held on. It always seemed like it would. The place had a stubbornness in its bones, and so did the people. Or at least it had. Because the truth is, the neat description you just read doesn't exist. Not in any official way. Not in the way towns are supposed to exist. Try looking it up. Try finding the history, the population, the anniversary celebrations. You won't. It's like someone took a thumb and smudged the name right off the page. And I think I know why. What happened in Schaefer on August 30th, 2018, wasn't a disaster you rebuild from. It wasn't a tragedy you memorialize with plaques and candlelight vigils. It was something else. Something that feels like it was meant to be swallowed and forgotten. I can't keep swallowing it. I don't have much time left anyway, and if nobody else ever hears about what happened, then it really will be like it never existed. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what whoever did this wanted. But I'm going to write it down as clearly as I can, from my own perspective, because it's the only proof I can give. That morning started like any other. My alarm went off at 6, blaring in that repetitive, aggressive way phones do when they're determined to drag you out of sleep. I groaned and fumbled at the screen, shutting it off while the number 6 Sato glowed back at me like an accusation. Fuck, already? I muttered. I showered, shaved, got dressed, moved through the usual routine on autopilot. I remember the house feeling normal. The air still. The hallway light a little too bright. The floorboards making their familiar sounds under my feet. When I went downstairs, I found my mother in the kitchen making breakfast. She was humming, soft and peaceful, like she was trying to make the world behave just by acting like it would. When she noticed me, she smiled. "Oh, hey, sweetie," she said. "I know you have work, but I'm cooking you some breakfast." I checked my phone and felt a little spike of stress. I was on a schedule. I worked at a plant about 30 minutes outside of town, and if I hit traffic or got delayed, it was a pain. The anniversary celebration was that day, too, and Main Street always got crowded. I opened my mouth to tell her I really had to go. "Mama, I really have to." I know. She cut in gently. "Just 5 more minutes, I promise. You're not going to make me go through all this for nothing, are you?" She chuckled and started moving faster, like her hands could speed up time. I let out a longer sigh than I needed to. In that moment, I felt like a teenager again, irritated by something that didn't deserve irritation. But with my mom, irritation always came with guilt right behind it. Her mind had been slipping for a while, little pieces going missing. After my dad died, she got worse. She wasn't dangerous, not like that. Just forgetful, confused sometimes. She'd repeat stories, misplace objects, ask questions she'd asked 5 minutes earlier. And the way she looked at me sometimes, it felt like she was trying to confirm I was real. Putting her in a nursing home felt like betrayal. So she moved in with me, and we made it work as best we could. It wasn't easy, but she was all I had left, and I knew I was all she had too. She spent most of her days inside, cooking, cleaning, trying to keep the household running like it still mattered. So I gave in. "Fine," I said, and kissed her cheek before waiting by the front door, scrolling my phone like the seconds weren't ticking. Of course, she took longer than 5 minutes. She always did. When she finally came to the door, she had a small Tupperware bowl with a lid on it. Bacon and eggs. Simple, traditional, her way of showing care. "Now be sure to eat that as soon as you get to work," she said. "That way it's still warm." "I will, Mama." I told her, and I meant it. "Just remember to feed Bubba while I'm gone." Bubba was my gray house cat, a lazy, judgmental creature who acted like the place belonged to him. My mom had gotten attached to him, probably because he was always there and didn't ask her to remember anything complicated. He was on the couch, grooming himself, ignoring both of us like we were background noise. She nodded, hugged me tight, and I left. On the drive out, I turned on the radio to the local station. The host was always a bit too energetic for 6 in the morning, like he drank a pot of coffee and then got possessed by country music. "Good morning, Schaffer." He boomed. "Hope y'all are having an amazing Thursday, because I know I am. After all, it's the town's anniversary. I know y'all are itching to celebrate on Main Street, so wear your best boots, tread the town, maybe listen to some music while you're at it. Here on Says FM, we've got the best early morning country tunes to start your day with. Say howdy to your neighbor. Love your girl like a Mustang." I'm your host, Alan Berg, and this is Cowgirls. I turned the volume down as I drove. Every August 30th, Schaefer held a town-wide anniversary event with a Western theme, partly because it fit the area, and partly because it matched the school district mascot. The mascot was Rodney the cowboy, a big friendly character that showed up at parades and pep rallies. On anniversary day, Main Street would be lined with hay bales, vendors, people in boots and cowboy hats. Kids ran around playing outlaw because school was out for the occasion. Adults pretended they weren't watching them as closely as they were. As I drove toward Main Street, I passed a kid in a cowboy hat who waved at me. His smile was huge and effortless. It forced a grin out of me, too, the kind you don't plan. I waved back and kept going. Then I hit traffic. Main Street was already congested. People were parking where they shouldn't. Trucks were hauling booths and supplies. Someone was walking a horse down the street like it was normal city behavior. I groaned and checked the time, feeling the familiar anger of being delayed by something everyone else was enjoying. I pushed through slowly, trying to get to the highway ramp that would take me out to the plant. I wanted to spend the day at home, honestly. I wanted to be with my mom. But my supervisors weren't local. The plant didn't care about Schaffer's anniversary. When I finally got close to the on-ramp, I saw traffic cones blocking it. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I yelled, slamming my palm on the steering wheel. The ramp was closed. Construction, apparently. I had to take public roads out to the next ramp about 10 minutes away, which meant I was going to be late no matter what. I took the detour, grinding my teeth, trying to calm down as I left the busy part of town behind. The outskirts of Schaffer were quieter. A tree line bordered both sides of the road, giving the area that wooded, peaceful feel that makes you forget you're only minutes from town. My frustration eased a little. Then I glanced at the Tupperware bowl on the passenger seat and considered eating the breakfast while I drove. Bad idea, but I was hungry and irritated, which is when you do stupid things. I fought with the lid one-handed, attention shifting between the road and the food. I finally popped it open and reached for a piece of bacon. That's when I heard the sudden hiss of escaping air. The car jolted hard. The steering wheel pulled. There was a scraping sound, metal and rubber complaining. My stomach dropped. Flat tire. I yanked the car onto the shoulder and came to a stop. Then I just sat there, gripping the wheel, staring ahead, letting the anger boil up and spill out. I yelled every curse I knew, loud, alone, like the trees could hear me. After a minute, I forced myself to breathe. I was already late. This was going to make it worse. I called work and told my supervisor what happened. He actually sounded understanding and gave me the day off. I felt a brief, guilty relief. A problem and a solution in one moment. Then I got out to check the damage. All my tires were shredded. Not just flat, mangled. Rubber frayed and torn beyond repair. I stood there staring, confused, and then I looked ahead on the road and saw why. A spike strip. Not a small one. Not something someone could have accidentally dropped. It was laid cleanly across the pavement, like a trap. My first thought was that I'd done it to myself by taking my eyes off the road at the worst possible moment. My second thought was, why would there be a spike strip here? I called the local sheriff's department and told them I'd hit something in the road that destroyed my tires. "We'll have someone out there right away," the officer said. I leaned against my car and lit a cigarette while I waited, staring at the spike strip like it might explain itself if I looked hard enough. It was wrong, not just dangerous. Wrong in a way that made my skin feel tight. I couldn't tell you why. It just felt out of place, like a piece of equipment from a different world dropped onto our quiet road. While I smoked, I heard a droning sound above me. We didn't get flyovers often, but it wasn't unheard of. Still, the sound made me look up. Something was climbing into the sky. It looked like a small jet, or maybe a military drone, and it seemed to be carrying a spherical object under its body. It was ascending fast, like it had taken off nearby and wanted to get high as quickly as possible. I squinted, trying to make out details, but it climbed too far, too fast, until it was just a dark speck against the bright morning. I was still staring upward when I heard a car coming. A Schaffer police cruiser pulled up and stopped before the spike strip. Two officers got out. One was older, bald with a goatee. The other was taller and younger. They walked toward the strip, and I joined them. It came out of nowhere, I said quickly. This thing is dangerous. Why is it even here? The older officer knelt to examine it. The younger one looked at me. Where were you headed? To work. You didn't take the highway? Before I could answer, the older officer stood and spoke without taking his eyes off the strip. He couldn't have. Ramps closed. Construction started yesterday. Couple weeks, they say. Then he poked the strip with his boot. To be honest, he said, if we didn't have this same situation on the other roads out of town, I'd assume you set it up for insurance money. He delivered it like a joke, but the words hit me like a bucket of cold water. This is happening on all the roads out of town? I asked. Yep, he said. Same thing happened with a woman in an SUV. The younger officer added she spun out and hit a tree. She's alive, but the car's done. The older officer shook his head. We don't know who's doing it, but whoever it is has money. These aren't like the ones we use. They're not yours? I asked. He looked at me like I should have known. No, ours are smaller. We throw them. These are bolted down. He nudged the strip again. It didn't move at all. Radio chatter crackled from the cruiser, and the younger officer stepped back to listen. His posture stiffened. Mac, he called. We gotta go. Something's happening up the way. The older officer gave me a quick look. Call AA. Tell him to watch out for the hazards. We're investigating. We'll handle it. Then they climbed back into the cruiser, drove around the spike strip, and headed farther down the road. I called, They said they'd send someone. I sat in my car, smoked another cigarette, and listened to the radio with one ear while watching the tree line. A few drops hit my windshield. Rain. I frowned. The forecast had called for clear skies. There hadn't been a single cloud that morning. I rolled the window down a little and leaned out to look. A drop hit my face. It stung sharp, like an insect bite, and I jerked back instinctively, yelping as I pulled my head inside and rolled the window up. I pressed my fingers to the spot. The skin felt hot. I stared at the windshield. The rain wasn't behaving right. It clung to the glass like oil, thick and slow, and when I turned on the wipers, they smeared it more than they cleared it. Then the drizzle became a downpour, sudden, heavy, like a switch had been flipped. I called my mom. She answered after a few rings, and her breathing was frantic. She was whimpering like she was in pain. Hello, sweetie? My heart started racing. Mama, it's me. Are you okay? Did the rain get you? Yes, she said, and I heard her gasp like she was trying not to cry. I was in the garden, and it came out of nowhere. It hurts a lot. Are you okay? I'm okay, I said quickly. I only got hit with a few drops. Listen, start a bath and wash it off, okay? Get inside. Stay inside. She made a broken sound and then said, okay, I will. I'm going to hang up now. She hung up abruptly. I didn't blame her. My stomach felt tight. I refreshed the weather app again and again. No rain, nothing. Clear all day. It didn't make sense. Then I saw movement through the smeared windshield. A red pickup truck was barreling down the road toward me, fast and reckless. It was aimed straight at the spike strip. Hey! Hey! I shouted, as if volume could bend reality. I leaned on my horn, frantic, but the truck didn't slow. It hit the strip at speed. The back end lifted like a kicked animal. The truck lurched forward and up, and for a split second it was airborne. passing my car with a sickening closeness. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. The engine roared and coughed like it was dying. The truck flipped and tumbled off the road, then slammed into a tree so hard it folded, pancaking against the trunk like a soda can. I sat there, frozen, staring, while the rain hammered my car. I don't know how long I stayed like that before sound returned fully to my head. My hands were shaking. But it wasn't only the crash that trapped me. It was one detail, a single image burned into the moment. As the truck flew past my window, I saw the driver through the open window. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't bracing. He was grinning, not a normal grin. Too wide, teeth fully bared, eyes open too far, and his gaze locked directly onto mine, as if he'd been waiting to meet my eyes during the worst second of his life. I snapped out of it and grabbed my phone, dialing 911. Call failed. I tried again. Call failed. My breath came fast. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and yelled into the empty car, "What the hell is going on?" Spike strip. Painful rain. A truck flipping. A man grinning as he died. No emergency calls connecting. It felt like the world had turned wrong around me, and I was the only one reacting to it. I considered getting out, but the rain hurt. I couldn't risk being exposed, not when a few drops had already stung like needles. I didn't know where to go, even if I could. Then the rain stopped. Just like that. Silence. I sat up straight and looked around. The world outside was blurred because the liquid still clung to the windows. It didn't drip off like water. It moved slowly, syrupy, sliding downward in thick sheets. When I hit the wipers, they finally pushed it aside enough for me to see. Everything was coated in it. Tree branches sagged with the weight. The fluid didn't bead and fall. It crept. I took a photo with my phone, more out of instinct than logic. The camera clicked, and right after, I heard something from behind me, across the road near the wrecked truck. A sound. I rolled my window down just a crack, careful, and listened. Laughter. Faint at first, like a recording played through a cheap speaker. Low-pitched and hysterical. It went on and on from the wreck. Impossible in a way that made my stomach twist. Then it faded, slowly, like a radio station drifting out of range. I sat there, unable to move. If he survived, why wasn't he screaming for help? If he was dying, how could he be laughing? After a few minutes, I forced myself to act. My mom was alone at home. She'd been hurt. Her voice had sounded wrong. I couldn't stay on that roadside waiting for while the town, my town, was getting hit by whatever this was. I got out of the car carefully, trying not to let any of the fluid touch my skin. It was on the pavement too, but oddly it wasn't slippery. It had a squishy, tacky feel under my shoe. I started to turn toward town, then stopped, pulled by a horrible curiosity. I walked toward the wreck. When I got close enough to see inside, I froze. The driver was still in the seat, crushed between the wheel and what was left of the dashboard. Twisted metal and engine parts pinned him in place. Blood ran down his chest and pooled beneath him. He was dead. There was no doubt. But his face, his mouth was stretched into that same wide, toothy grin. Eyes opened too far, staring through the shattered glass like he was still looking at me, like the expression was carved into him. I turned away, gagging, air scraping my throat. What the fuck? I whispered, unable to say it louder, like loudness would invite something to answer. I started walking toward town. I tried calling emergency services again. Nothing. I tried again. Nothing. So I called my mom. It rang and rang until she picked up. "Sweetie," she said, and her voice was wrong. Panicked, yes, but also deeper, like her throat had dropped into a lower register. Each word came out on a shaky breath, like she was barely holding on to herself. "Mama, it's me," I said. "What's going on? What's happening?" She didn't seem to hear me. She cried into the phone, her sobs low and broken, and I heard Bubba in the background making frantic sounds, meowing and yowling like he was trapped. "Sweetie, are you there? Please, 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 I need to hear your voice. I'm here," I said louder, but her panic rolled right over my words. "Sweetie, the people outside, everyone, they're not okay. They're not okay." There were so many of them on Main Street, dear God. My legs went weak. I kept walking anyway, faster now. "Mama, stay inside," I said. "Lock the doors. Get in the bath and wash." But she was sobbing too hard to listen. "Sweetie, please," she said. "Something's wrong. I feel sick. I want to leave." Then the call ended. I stopped in the road and yelled, "Mama," as if she might hear through the air. I called back, voicemail, again, voicemail, again. My chest felt like it was caving in. I started running. 2 helicopters tore overhead toward town, big and low. The sound shook my bones. I didn't stop to think why helicopters would be flying into Schaffer. I didn't stop to question anything. I just ran, chasing the sound as if it meant rescue. As I ran, the sticky liquid began to evaporate. The squishy sound under my shoes faded as the road dried. I barely noticed. I was thinking only of my mother alone in the house, my mother who sounded like she was breaking apart. After what felt like forever, maybe 30 minutes of running, I reached the first buildings on the edge of town. A gas station. I stopped, bent over, gasping, trying not to puke. The place looked abandoned. Cars were left at odd angles, some with engines still running like the drivers had simply vanished. Driver's side windows were shattered on a few. Near a small black Nissan, there was a dark pool on the ground that looked like blood. From one of the cars, the radio was still playing. Alan Berg's voice came through, but it wasn't cheerful now. It was frantic, cracking. "They're trying to get in," he was saying. Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. What is wrong with their faces? I don't know what happened to this town, but someone, anyone, please help. Oh, God, shit, they're breaking the window. Glass shattered. Then Alan screamed, "Please, stay away from me. You monsters, no, get away." The scream turned into something worse, a sound of pain so raw it didn't even sound human. Then came wet tearing noises, the kind you only hear when something is being pulled apart. And underneath it all, that low laughter started again. Even after Alan's screaming cut off, the laughter continued. So did the sounds. I backed away from the car like it might bite me. My voice came out tiny. Oh my God. I ran again, deeper into town, toward my neighborhood, toward my house, toward the place my mother was waiting if she was still waiting. As I got closer, I started to hear it without needing a radio. Screams, shouts, and those laughs, too low, too steady, too wrong. I tried to take side streets, alleys, any route that kept me out of open areas. Cars were crashed into each other. Some doors hung open. I kept my eyes down as much as I could, because every time I looked too long at what was on the ground, my mind tried to break. Once, I ducked behind a parked car when I saw someone dart across the street, laughing. Just the sound of laughter made my skin crawl now. From behind that car, I saw a house with its front door wide open. The inside was pitch black, the doorway like a hole cut into the world. Blood was smeared across the frame. A red handprint was stamped beside it like someone had tried to push themselves away. The lower half of a body lay on the porch. The upper half was inside the darkness, hidden. Intestines spilled out across the wooden boards like ropes. The smell hit me even from the street, sour and rotten. I covered my mouth, tears stinging my eyes. I whispered, "I can't do this. I can't do this," over and over, like saying it could make it true. Then I forced myself to breathe. I thought of my mom. I thought of my dad. I thought of how my mom started taking meds, how she forgot things, how she still tried to make me breakfast like that was her job in the world. I couldn't leave her. I stood up shaking and kept moving. The closer I got to Main Street, the louder it became. Not just noise, but chaos. The air felt full of it, like sound itself was thick. I took a narrow back alley and edged forward until I could see around the corner. What I saw didn't fit inside my brain at first. My mind rejected it the way it rejects a nightmare after you wake up. But I was awake. I was standing there. And it was real. Main Street was a slaughterhouse. People were running in all directions, laughing and screaming, ripping each other apart with bare hands and whatever tools they could grab. Some of the riders who had been preparing horses that morning were using knives and machetes, hacking at the animals like they were carving meat. Horses screamed, high and terrible, while people leaned into them, tearing and biting, their faces smeared red. Normal citizens, people I recognized in flashes, were chasing each other down and colliding like it was a sport. The ones who looked terrified, the ones who were trying to get away, stood out like bright targets. I saw a heavy man stumble and fall in the road. He screamed, "No, no, no!" Children caught him. Kids in cowboy hats. Kids who should have been playing pretend. They pounced on him, smiling, laughing in that low register that didn't match their bodies. Tiny hands grabbed at his skin and pulled like they were stripping fabric off a couch. He screamed until the sound turned wet, gurgling, and then a little girl, no older than 10, bit into his throat and tore a chunk away like it was food. I stumbled back behind the wall, pressing my shoulder to it, trying not to make noise. My whole body trembled so hard it felt like I might rattle apart. I watched, helpless, as two women bit each other's faces. Not fighting like humans fight, not in pain, not even angry. They were smiling as they did it, laughing through mouths full of blood. It went on and on like it would never stop. In the distance, I saw something that made my eyes sting. On top of a strip mall roof was Rodney the cowboy, the mascot costume. Big hat, friendly face. He was swinging a makeshift weapon at people trying to climb up. He was trying to hold them back. A woman nearly made it onto the roof. The butt of his fake rifle connected with her head, and I heard the crack even over the noise. She fell backward, cackling, like the pain was funny. Then 2 men came up behind Rodney with broken glass bottles and started stabbing, over and over. The costume head muffled the screams. Blood sprayed across the fake smiling face of the mascot and rained down on the crowd below. People opened their mouths to catch it. I felt nauseous and bent over and vomited in the alley. The smell of blood and rot was everywhere. Flies were already swarming, not just over bodies, but over what was left of them. When I lifted my head, wiping my mouth with my sleeve, I heard something that made my stomach drop. Laughter in the alley. Close. I turned and saw them running toward me. 4, maybe 5. Smiling so wide their faces looked split. Eyes too open, their laughter low and hungry. I ran. I burst out onto the street and sprinted, barely avoiding a woman who lunged for me. Her fingers grazed my leg before she hit the pavement, and the others stampeded past her like she wasn't even there. They were fast, faster than they should be. I could hear heavy footfalls behind me, the sound of someone jumping on cars as they chased, metal frames creaking under the impact. My lungs burned. My legs started to fail. I didn't look back because I knew what I'd see. I was about to collapse when a truck horn blared to my right. A semi screamed into view, missing me by inches. It plowed straight into a small bakery, smashing brick and glass and dust into the air. The sound of laughter behind me cut off with a crash. I stumbled and dropped to my hands and knees behind a car, sucking in air, shaking so hard my teeth clicked. My body was out of fuel. I peeked around the car and saw the semi lodged in the bakery. Then I saw the driver. He was slumped forward, blood on his face, head turned toward me. He was smiling. That same wide grin plastered on like it wasn't connected to injury or fear. He laughed silently behind the windshield, his shoulders bouncing slightly. I couldn't hear him through the glass, but I didn't need to. I knew the sound. The front of the semi was covered in what was left of my pursuers. Limbs stuck out of the rubble at wrong angles. Dust and brick coated everything. The driver had tried to hit me. In the process, he saved me. I stood up slowly, rage bubbling through the horror like bile. "Fuck you, you psycho," I spat and flipped him off. His expression didn't change. The smile stayed, steady and bright, like a mask nailed to his face. I turned away and forced my legs to move again, toward my neighborhood, toward my house, toward my mom. And when I looked down the street and saw my home in the distance, sitting there quiet and normal like it didn't belong to this world anymore, I felt something worse than fear. Settle in my chest, because I had run through a town full of people who weren't people anymore, and I'd made it this far. Which meant I was about to find out whether my mother had made it too. Story 5. I'm a twin. I always have been, and I always will be. Some people talk about being a twin like it's just a fun fact, like it's the same as having a sibling who happens to be your age. For me, it's never been that simple. It's a constant. It's a second heartbeat in the room. It's knowing, without checking, when someone is lying to her. It's hearing a laugh from across a crowded hallway and knowing exactly who it belongs to. It's waking up from a nightmare and feeling, even before you open your eyes, whether the other bed is occupied. Sam and I have always been close, even when we were little and fought over stupid things. We argued about clothes, about who got the better seat in the car, about who copied whose homework, about nothing. We could be mean to each other for 10 minutes and then be inseparable again like the fight never happened. She's my best friend, and she knows me in a way no one else ever will. And I know her too. I know her moods, her habits, the small routines she doesn't even notice she has. I know the look she gets right before she laughs for real. I know how she gets quiet when something bothers her, like she's trying to solve it inside her head before she gives it a voice. Most people can't tell us apart. They hear the word identical and don't even try. They just smile and make the same jokes about mirror images and how it must be impossible for teachers and friends. Even our parents mess up sometimes, especially when they're tired. But to me, the differences have always been obvious. You just have to look the right way. Sam's jaw is slightly rounder. My eyes are a little more oval, and there's a small mole beneath my left ear that she doesn't have. It's tiny, but it's there, and it's always been one of the easiest ways to confirm who's who if we're standing in the same light. A few months ago, my sister disappeared. There's no dramatic build-up to that sentence, no warning that made sense at the time. One day she was there, acting like herself, complaining about school, laughing at something on her phone, teasing me the way she always did. The next day, she was gone. Not missing for a few hours, not maybe she stayed over at a friend's. Gone, as in vanished, without a trace. The search started immediately. Police, neighbors, friends, family, posters, phone calls, people walking the streets and checking parks and back lanes and places teenagers go when they don't want to be seen. Everyone asked the same questions in different voices. Was she upset? Was she seeing someone? Did she have a secret account online? Did she talk about leaving? Did she seem scared of anything? Did anyone strange come around the house? No one found anything. There weren't clues. There weren't sightings. There wasn't a note. There wasn't a rumor that stuck. They didn't know if she ran away or if she was taken. They didn't know if she was alive or dead. They couldn't even decide which possibility was more likely. And that made it worse, because at least one clear story would have given us something solid to hold on to. Instead, we had nothing but questions. After a month of nothing, the world got quieter in a specific way. Not peaceful, quiet. The kind of quiet you get when people run out of things to say. The first few days, everyone is frantic and loud, full of action, full of plans and hope and reassurance. Then, when there's no progress, you start hearing the same phrases over and over until they feel like insults. We're so sorry. We're thinking of you. If there's anything we can do. It's like people want to help, but they also want the situation to be tidy. They want it to end, because living near someone else's grief makes them uncomfortable. They say those words to show they care, but after the 10th time, the 20th, the 50th, you want to scream. Not because they're wrong, but because they don't change anything. One night, after weeks of barely sleeping, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while the dark shifted toward morning. The house was still, but it wasn't calm. It was heavy. Even when everything was silent, you could feel the tension like a physical thing. I heard quiet sounds downstairs, soft and uneven. Weeping. One of my parents was awake again. Sometimes they tried to be quiet about it, like they didn't want me to hear, but grief leaks through walls. It doesn't stay contained. I got out of bed and crept across the hallway to Sam's room. I hadn't been in there since she disappeared. I don't know why. Part of me couldn't stand it. Part of me felt like stepping into her room would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. But that night I was drawn to it like I didn't have a choice. I opened her door slowly, holding my breath. Her room looked exactly the same as it had the day she left. Her clothes were still in the same places. Her bed was made the way she always made it. Not perfectly, but neat enough. Her desk still had the same little mess of pens and notebooks. Even her hairbrush sat where she'd left it, with a few strands of hair caught in it that made my throat tighten. I sat on the edge of her bed, and I felt strangely anxious about touching anything. Like the room was a museum, and I'd break something important if I moved wrong. For a brief moment, the silence felt almost peaceful, like I was sitting inside a memory that hadn't been disturbed. Then my skin prickled. It started at the back of my neck, that instinctive warning feeling, the sensation of being watched. Not imagined, not vague, specific and direct, like a pair of eyes had landed on me and were holding steady. My chest tightened. I turned my head slowly, scanning the corners of the room. Nothing. The room was empty. It had to be empty. I told myself that. I repeated it inside my head like a prayer. But the feeling didn't leave. If anything, it grew stronger. A cold trickle ran down my spine, and I stood up so fast the bed creaked under me. That sound made me flinch like I'd been caught. I left her room quickly and went back to mine, shutting my door and climbing into bed with my heart pounding. No matter what I told myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in there with me. Something silent and patient. I must have slept eventually, because the next thing I remember is waking up to my mother screaming. Not a startled yelp, not an oh my God kind of cry, a full, raw scream that shook the house. My father's footsteps thundered up the stairs. Doors opened. Someone slammed a hand against the wall. Everything turned chaotic in seconds. I stumbled out of bed and into the hallway, and for a second I thought something terrible had happened. Another loss. Another disaster. Then I saw the bedroom door at the end of the hall. Sam's door. It was open, and in the doorway, my mother stood folded in on herself, making sounds I didn't understand at first because my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Sam was in her bed, asleep under the covers, like she'd never left. 3 weeks, 6 days, and 18 hours after we last saw her, she was just back. There was no slow return, no knock at the door, no phone call from the police saying they'd found her. She was simply there, in the exact place she should not have been. Sam woke up to our mother's screaming and wailing, to my dad swearing and shouting, to me frozen in the doorway, unable to move. To Sam, none of it made sense. She blinked at us like we were the ones being strange, like she'd gone to sleep and woken up in a different version of her life. She had no memory of the month she'd been gone, no dream like fragments, no confusion about where she'd been, no sense of time passing. It was blank, a clean cut, like someone had lifted her out of reality and set her back down again. The police didn't know what to do with it. They asked questions and asked again, searching for holes in her story, but there was no story. Doctors ran tests, checked her body, checked her blood, checked anything they could think of. They said she was healthy. Therapists and psychologists tried to talk through trauma and suppressed memories and dissociation. Nothing fit neatly. Sam seemed calm, almost too calm, but she didn't appear injured or malnourished or sick. Her mind just didn't contain that missing time. Our parents were relieved in the way drowning people are relieved when they reach shore. They didn't want mysteries. They wanted their daughter back. They wanted normal. They were happy to move on, happy to accept any explanation that let them sleep at night. At first, I was happy too. I hugged her so hard I thought my ribs would crack. I cried into her hair. I listened to her voice like I needed proof it was real. For a couple of days, I tried to convince myself that this was the end of it, that something horrible had happened, and now it was over. But the realization that something was wrong came slowly. Not like a sudden revelation, more like a creeping stutter of wrongness, tiny moments that didn't match what I knew. Small pauses, small changes, the kind of things other people might miss, the kind of things you only notice when you've spent your entire life tuned to someone's smallest details. At first I thought it was just me, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched that never really left after that night in her room. I figured I was paranoid because I'd spent a month imagining every possible horror. Then I started noticing Sam. She laughed and smiled like normal. She teased me. She used the same nicknames. She let Dad fuss over her and answered Mom's questions with patience that almost felt sweet. If you saw her in a hallway at school, you'd think she was herself. But when she thought nobody was looking, her face changed. The smile would slide off like it had been placed there and then removed. Her expression would go blank. Not sad, not angry, just empty. Her eyes would lose focus like she wasn't seeing the room anymore, like there was no one home behind them. The first time I noticed, I thought I'd imagined it. I stared at her from the doorway while she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and for a few seconds, she looked like a shell wearing my sister's skin. Then, like a switch flipped, she sensed me watching. Her face came alive again. The smile returned. She turned and asked me a question in a normal, light voice, as if nothing had happened. It kept happening. I'd walk into a room and see her in that blank state, and then she'd catch me and wake up into Sam again. The pattern was consistent enough that I stopped being able to explain it away. What frightened me most was that she had Sam's memories. Whatever she was, she knew everything. She knew about the time Sam broke her wrist 6 years ago and cried because she hated hospitals. She knew the name of our childhood dog that died when we were 8. She knew the secrets I whispered to her late at night, the things I would never have told anyone else. She knew the jokes that only made sense to us, the ones that came from moments nobody else witnessed. I tried to trick her because I needed proof. I invented fake friends. I mentioned made-up events. I twisted details slightly and watched her face for confusion. She never slipped. She'd correct me if I pushed too far, like Sam always did, frowning and saying, "No, that wasn't me, that was you," or laughing and playing along and making the story even wilder, with a wink like she was keeping up the game. It was too perfect. Then I noticed something else. Sam wasn't eating. She'd never been a big eater, but this was different. At dinner, she'd cut food into pieces and push it around her plate. She'd lift bites to her mouth and chew too long, swallowing too carefully. She'd compliment Dad's cooking and talk to Mom in a bright voice, like she was trying to distract them from watching her. Then she'd volunteer to clear the table, carrying her plate away before anyone could look too closely. At first, my parents took it as normal after trauma, appetite loss, stress. They were so relieved she was alive that they didn't want to push too hard. I pushed. One day, I bought Sam's favorite cake, the exact one she used to beg for on birthdays. I brought it home and made a little show of it in front of our parents, acting cheerful like I was just trying to celebrate her return. "I got your favorite," I said. Sam smiled. "You didn't have to do that." I cut the cake and handed her the first slice. She thanked me and refused, saying she was too full. I laughed and pushed a little, gently, reminding her she never turned it down before. For a split second, something flashed across her face. Not irritation, not embarrassment. Fury. Her brown eyes seemed to darken, like someone poured ink into them. The expression was sharp and alien, so intense it made me go cold. Then I blinked, and it was gone. The smile was back. The warmth was back. "Okay," she said evenly, and took the slice. She brought it to her mouth and bit down. I saw the disgust before she covered it. It was subtle, but it was there, like she'd bitten into something rotten. She forced herself to chew. Then, the moment she could escape without it looking strange, she excused herself and went to the bathroom. I followed. Behind the closed door, I heard retching, not polite gagging, real, angry vomiting. And between the sounds, low muttering that didn't sound like Sam at all. It sounded rougher, like words pushed through a throat that wasn't used to them. After that, I watched her constantly, even when I pretended I wasn't, and little details began to shift. The shape of her jaw, the roundness of her eyes, things that shouldn't change in a few weeks, things that shouldn't change at all. At first, I told myself it was stress, weight loss, my own obsession. But yesterday, I saw it clearly. Her jaw looked slightly sharper than before. Her eyes looked less round, more like mine. And that terrified me, because I remembered the differences between us like they were carved into my brain. I remembered the sensation of being watched in Sam's room the night before she returned. I remembered sitting on her bed and feeling eyes on me in an empty room. A thought formed that made my stomach twist. Something had been there. Something had been waiting. That evening, I walked quietly up the stairs and stopped outside Sam's door. It was slightly open. I peeked through the gap. She was sitting at her dressing table, brushing her hair over one shoulder with slow, careful motions, like she was practicing, like she was learning how to be her in the mirror. I leaned in a little more and focused on the side of her neck, just under her left ear. There was a small mole. My mole. My mouth went dry. I looked up at the mirror, expecting to see my sister's face reflected back at me. Instead, I saw what was really sitting there. It wore our face, but it was wrong in ways the human brain understands instantly, even when it can't name them. The eyes were too sunken, like the skin had tightened and shrunk around them. The iris and pupil weren't separate anymore. They were a single, slick blackness. The whites of the eyes looked dry and dead, and a horizontal yellow-brown band cut through them like a stain. The skin was a sick pale gray with patches of bruised color, like something had been damaged under the surface. Its lips were pulled back, showing teeth that looked too exposed, too eager, and the gums behind them were full of holes and dents like decay. And the hands. I noticed the hands last, which still makes me feel stupid, because I should have noticed them first. The fingers were longer than Sam's, the nails yellowed and thick, shaped into points like claws that had been filed. My body locked up. I stood in the doorway, unable to move, my brain refusing to send signals to my legs. Terror doesn't always make you run. Sometimes it makes you a statue. In the mirror, its gaze shifted. It looked straight at me through the reflection, as if it had been aware of me the entire time. I waited for it to turn and rush at me. I waited for it to slam the door, to leap, to do something violent, because that would almost have been easier than what it did instead. It didn't move. It smiled, slowly, deliberately, like it was showing me it could, like it was enjoying my fear. Its thin, bluish lips stretched wider over those damaged gums. The smile didn't look like happiness. It looked like ownership. Then it made a sound, almost like humming, that scraped across my nerves. It reminded me of nails on a chalkboard, or a fork dragged across a plate. That same sharp vibration that makes your teeth ache. I finally unlocked. I turned and fled back to my room, closing the door hard enough that the frame rattled. It didn't follow me. That was the worst part, in a way. If it had chased me, I could have screamed. I could have woken my parents. I could have pointed and said, look at it. It's not her. But it let me go like it knew I wasn't going anywhere. Like it knew the house was already its. I sat on my bed, shaking, trying to make my thoughts line up. I grabbed my phone and started searching online, falling down every rabbit hole I could find. Possession, demons, spirits, skinwalkers, doppelgangers, every creepy forum and blog that promised hidden knowledge, every warning about things that mimic loved ones. Nothing matched perfectly. Some stories talked about beings that copy your voice but can't copy your memories. This thing had the memories. Some talked about creatures that can mimic a face but get the details wrong. This thing was changing the details, correcting itself, becoming more like me. And that's what I can't stop thinking about. It didn't just take Sam's place. It seems to be moving toward me. Like Sam was the first skin it wore because it was easier. Like it needed practice. Like it needed time in the house, time around our parents, time around me, to learn how to hold our life in its hands without dropping it. I haven't confronted it since. I haven't said a word about the mole or the mirror or the way its eyes looked like holes filled with ink. I haven't told my parents because I don't know how to do it without sounding insane, and because some part of me is afraid that if I say it out loud, it will look at me with that slow smile and finally decide it's done pretending. Right now, I'm doing the only thing I can do, watching, listening, sleeping with my door locked, avoiding being alone with it in rooms where nobody can hear me. Because whatever came back in Sam's bed knows our family. It knows our routines. It knows our secrets. And it's still here, walking around in my sister's body, wearing my face a little more every day.